I started at a local newspaper, doing work experience at a local newspaper, and I really wanted to work in newspapers. I thought that was the best profession in the world, and to me felt like real proper journalism, investigation stories and publishing them on the best medium. And then by chance ended up doing some work experience from there at local radio, and they introduced me to a local radio reporter called Neil Roy, who made me fall in love with radio. And it was he showed me that you can have an idea for a story and it can be on air 5 minutes later. And he showed me how instantaneous it is and how simple it is. And I kind of fell in love with it and spent the next 15 years working in radio. Every day is different in terms of the stories we cover or the treatments we come up with, or just the ideas we're having. I guess the starting point of a day is we have a team of people who work between 4 in the morning and 10:30 or 11 at night. So we're not quite 24/7, but I guess the structures within our day are at 8:10 after the 8 o'clock bulletin. We have our first editorial meeting, and that's where we're talking about the main stories of the day, and not necessarily the main stories that everyone else on the BBC or externally are covering, but the main stories that we think our audience care about the most. So we try and look at the main kind of half a dozen stories that we think 16 to 24-year-olds are most engaged with or care about or want to know more about. And then we talk about how we can cover them. We don't just talk about covering them on the radio, we talk about how we can cover them online, and on social media. Are we making a film for them? Are we writing just a text-based article? Are we doing just a piece for the radio? And it's never just about let's just make a package and we move on to the next story. It's always what elements do we really need to tell our story, tell our audience about that story. What's the most creative treatment we can give to it? What are the most interesting facts that will bring it to life? Or who are the most interesting people we can talk to who will really get our audience to kind of relate to that story? So the treatments are as important as the story itself. That's our morning meeting. And then the day is structured by the 2 on-air programmes. So we have our first programme at 12:45, and at 1 o'clock we have a big debrief, which is where we get the team together again and we talk about what we've done so far online and on air and what we can do better at. How can we change the 12:45 programme to move it on for 5:45? Are there other stories we need to consider? And what stories haven't we done so well on? And then again, at 6 o'clock we have a similar meeting and look ahead slightly to the next day as well. Yeah, presenters are great fun. They're brilliant to work with. I worked for 6 years. I was Victoria Derbyshire's editor, and I in the last kind of 4 years of my time at 5 Live, I also became the editor of Sheila Fogarty and Richard Bacon. So I was in charge of 6 hours of programmes, and Victoria and I had a really special relationship, and I'm now working with her to launch a new programme on BBC Two. And the key, I think, to building those relationships with presenters is just to have and allow them to trust you completely. And once they trust you, you can do anything with that relationship. But there's always a period at the beginning where you're testing each other out, and they're testing if they can trust you, and you're testing if they're good enough effectively. And once you've got that trust, you can take the programs and the journeys into so many different levels. And Victoria, Sheila, and Richard are 3 very different presenters. So Victoria's really about the forensic interviews and the being across every aspect of her brief, and really, really caring about the audience and the way we tell the stories, and does that brilliantly. Sheila's got a different kind of breadth and depth. She's a really warm presenter. She kind of glides from one item to the other and is like a swan who's kind of like juggling all these different balls of stories and always sounds really, really effortless, and just brings kind of a different sense of personality to the programme. And then Richard is as crazy as you'd expect, and you'd always be on your seat of your pants with Richard. You'd never know quite who's going to say next, and there'd always be an element that anything could happen. And so the combination of those 3 presenters, I think, was really exciting to work with. And then at Radio 1, at NewsBeat, obviously I work with Chris Smith and Tina DeHealy, who are our main presenters. And again, the great thing about the presenters at Radio 1 is that all of our team of people can present NewsBeat. So our team, we have about 40-odd journalists, and all of those are presenters, reporters, shoot edits, make their own films, write for online, read bulletins, write bulletins, and I think it's the most multi-skilled team in news who can do everything and do everything really, really well. And at NewsBeat, it's a different style of presenting. You're not doing live interviews. You're not filling airtime for 2 hours or 3 hours. You're presenting a really tightly produced, well-written, 15-minute summary. Habits are changing, and people are listening for slightly less now, and they're listening in different ways, which is why Radio 1's got a really clear strategy of listen, watch, share. And we're not just measured on the number of people who are listening to us on an analogue radio or an old-fashioned radio. It's much more about, are you consuming our content on YouTube or on social media or on our websites? And it's about realising that we can't just exist on one linear platform. It's about making sure our content reaches our audience wherever they are. Because we know that our audience, the first thing they do, anyone in 16 to 24-year-old age group and older, the first thing they do when they wake up is they pick up their phone and they're wanting news and views to come to them through their phone. So it's about us accepting that and finding ways of kind of embracing that. 2015 is going to be NewsBeat's most ambitious election ever. We've got 3 big audience debates across the country, where we're going to have 150 NewsBeat listeners and audience members in each debate, hosted by Chris Smith and Tina Dahealy, looking at the 3 issues that our audience care about the most. And there will be, if you imagine Question Time, there'll be nothing like Question Time. So whereas Question Time is so much more a kind of a formulaic, scripted question and answer, these are much more kind of, in the best possible way, a free-for-all, where the audience are as important as the politicians they'll be talking to, and sometimes the best moments will be the audience talking to each other and arguing with each other or around with each other or discussing stuff with each other. So it'll be far more audience-led. And those debates will go on Radio 1 and on the News Channel and on BBC 3, so we'll be across 3 different networks. And yeah, hopefully they'll be really good and get lots of people who are not normally engaged with news debating the key issues. We're also going to be doing leader interviews with all the main party leaders, so David Cameron, Ed Miliband, Nick Clegg, but also Nicola Sturgeon from the SNP, Plaid Cymru and the Greens and UKIP. So we're doing 7 big kind of leader interviews. Some will be half-hour interviews, some will be slightly shorter interviews. And again, they'll be presented by Tina and Chris, but also feeding in questions from listeners. We'll take some NewsBeat listeners to meet those party leaders. We're also doing the biggest ever survey of 18 to 24-year-olds. So the big, no one's ever compiled a survey as big as we're going to do, and we're going to be asking our audience what the key issues that matter to them are and what politicians need to do to win their votes. And we get those results in the next couple of weeks, and we broadcast them at the beginning of March. And we're designing our own NewsBeat election game, which will either be a success or it will absolutely fall flat on its face. But the idea is it's trying to make politics engageable in a kind of a platform game. So it's quite an addictive game, and within that there's a kind of an element of matching parties and policies. And as you kind of proceed, you get further and further along the route. So we'll see how that works. We're kind of slightly sceptical about how it'll work, but hopefully it'll do well. Consume news passionately. You know, don't if you're only vaguely interested in news, and then working in journalism isn't for you. But consume it passionately. Read vicariously. Read different newspapers, different online features. You know, read BuzzFeed, read Vice. Look at what really brilliant innovators like the New York Times and Washington Post are doing and how they're telling stories. Be really, really hungry and don't take no for an answer. So, be like a dog with a bone with stories, and don't ever feel that you can walk away from something. Want to keep trying and keep pushing yourself further and further. And just always never want to kind of stand still and enjoy the view. Always think that you can do something better and keep evolving and keep learning. And just come into a newsroom, and if you're trying to get jobs initially, just bring a lot of passion and enthusiasm, and you cannot tell you how much kind of goodwill that buys you, seeing someone who's really keen to learn and keen to be part of the team.